What happens when a multi-billion-dollar deal, the culmination of a CEO's entire career, is about to implode in a high-stakes meeting? The man at the center of it all, titan of industry, Arthur Sterling, finds himself utterly powerless, his future hanging by a thread, all because of a language he can't understand. The air is thick with tension, careers are on the line, and his formidable Dutch counterpart is seconds from walking away forever. But in the corner of the room, polishing silverware and invisible to the world of high finance, is a waitress who understands every venom-laced word and holds the key to saving it all. The Ethelgard restaurant wasn't merely a place to eat, it was a theater of power on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Its patrons didn't book tables, they secured audiences. Sunlight strained through the crisp October air, angled through the tall arched windows, illuminating dust motes, dancing like tiny diamonds over tables draped in heavy Belgian linen. The clinking of crystal silverware against Bernardaud porcelain was the room's hushed rhythmic heartbeat. At the most secluded table in a private alcove, overlooking a manicured courtyard, sat Arthur Sterling. At 52, he was a man forged in the crucible of Wall Street ambition and Silicon Valley disruption. His company, Sterling Dynamics, was a colossus of advanced robotics and renewable energy technology, a name that made markets tremble. His face, usually a mask of controlled command, was beginning to show the faintest cracks. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly coiffed. His Tom Ford suit was tailored to within a millimeter of its life, but the rhythmic tapping of his Mont Blanc pen against a leather-bound folio betrayed the storm brewing within. Across from him sat Hendrik van der Berg. The Dutchman was a stark contrast to Sterling's modern sharpness. He was older, perhaps 70, with a full head of white hair and a face etched with the lines of a man who had navigated both corporate boardrooms and the unforgiving North Sea. His family firm, Vandermeer Marine Tech, was the global leader in tidal energy conversion. They weren't just pioneers, they were the institution. Vandermeer held patents that Sterling Dynamics desperately needed to complete their global Project Tsunami, a revolutionary plan to power entire coastal cities. This wasn't just a deal, it was for the legacy, for a cover story in Forbes, for the future. The deal was valued at $3.2 billion, and it was dying on the vine. The problem was twofold. First, Hendrik van der Berg was staunchly, almost militantly traditional. He had agreed to fly to New York, but on his terms. The final critical negotiations were to be conducted face-to-face, and as a matter of principle, and Arthur suspected, as a power play primarily in his native Dutch. The second, more immediate problem was that Arthur's translator, a renowned linguist named Jean-Pierre Dubois, was missing. He was 47 minutes late. Richard Arthur murmured into his collar microphone, his voice a low growl that didn't disturb the placid surface of his water glass. Any word. Through his nearly invisible earpiece, the frantic voice of his chief operating officer, Richard Hayes, crackled back. Nothing, Arthur. His phone goes straight to voicemail. His assistant is hysterical. We've checked every traffic camera on the FDR Drive and the Midtown Tunnel. It's like he vanished. Unacceptable Arthur hissed, his eyes locked on Van der Berg, who was now calmly inspecting the tines of his fork, as if judging the craftsmanship of a national treasure. The Dutchman's two associates, stone-faced men in severe dark suits, flanked him like gargoyles. Van der Berg placed the fork down with deliberate precision. He looked at Arthur, a glint of something cold and dismissive in his pale blue eyes. He spoke in slow, heavily accented English, each word a carefully chosen stone dropped into a still pond. Mr. Sterling, punctuality is the courtesy of kings. It is also the foundation of trust in business. Your man is not punctual. 1,000 apologies, Hendrik Arthur said, his voice smooth as polished marble, betraying none of the acid churning in his gut. An unforeseen traffic event, I'm sure. New York is a beast." Van den Berg offered a thin, unconvinced smile. He then turned to one of his associates and spoke in rapid, guttural Dutch. Deze Amerikaan denkt dat charme een vervanging is voor competentie. Hij verspilt onze tijd. This American thinks charm is a substitute for competence. He is wasting our time. Arthur smiled blankly, the words washing over him like meaningless static. He felt a hot flush of impotence crawl up his neck. He was the king of his world, a man who could reshape coastlines with his technology and futures with his signature. Yet in this moment, he was a functional illiterate. He could only guess at the sentiment by the contemptuous curl of the associate's lip. 20 feet away, near a service station, hidden by a large floral arrangement, Isabella Rossi was meticulously polishing a row of wine glasses. To the powerful men in the alcove, she was part of the scenery, as inanimate as the damask wallpaper. She wore the restaurant's simple uniform, a black dress, a crisp white apron with a quiet dignity. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat, severe bun, and her focus on her task was absolute. But her ears were burning. Isabella, or Izzy, as her friends knew her, understood every single word. She had spent 4 years in the Netherlands, not as a tourist, but as a student of historical linguistics at the prestigious Leiden University. She could not only speak fluent Dutch, but she could differentiate between the formal Haags dialect and the more common Randstad accent. Van den Berg spoke the former, the language of old money and diplomacy. She heard the Dutchman's casual dismissal of the American. She saw the flicker of frustration on Arthur Sterling's face. She had served him before. She knew who he was. She'd read about Sterling Dynamics, about their ambitious projects. She'd also read that their chief rival, the notoriously aggressive Titan Corp, run by the ruthless Damon Pierce, would do anything to see them fail. Another 5 minutes crawled by. The silence in the alcove grew heavy, suffocating. Van den Berg cleared his throat, a sound like gravel turning over. He spoke in English again, his patience clearly gone. "I believe we are at an impasse before we have even begun. Perhaps this was a mistake. We have a flight to Amsterdam at 5. It was a clear ultimatum. Arthur's face went pale. Richard's voice was a panicked squawk in his ear. "Arthur, you can't let him walk. Stall him, offer him anything. Stall him with what? Mime charades." The $3.2 billion legacy was about to walk out the door and board a KLM flight, and it was all because of a communication breakdown. Arthur Sterling, the master communicator, the king of the pitch, was speechless. Izzy placed the last wine glass on her tray. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. This was insane. It wasn't her world. It wasn't her business. Her life was about Tip's rent and the crushing weight of her father's medical bills. Getting involved was a risk of unimaginable proportions. She could be fired on the spot for even approaching the table unbidden. But she also heard the echo of her father's voice, a brilliant but luckless engineer who always told her, "Izzy, knowledge is useless unless you have the courage to apply it." Van den Berg made a motion to stand. His associates began gathering their papers. It was now or never. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Izzy picked up the silver water pitcher. She straightened her apron, smoothed her dress, and with a resolve that felt both terrifying and utterly right, she began to walk toward the alcove. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was about to step onto the stage. As Isabella Rossi approached the table, the atmosphere was so thick with tension, she could almost taste it, a metallic, anxious flavor that clung to the air. The world seemed to slow down. She could see the minute details, a bead of condensation tracing a path down Arthur Sterling's water glass, the tight clench of his jaw, the way his knuckles were white where he gripped his pen. He looked like a caged lion, powerful but trapped. Hendrik van der Berg was already halfway out of his chair, his expression one of finality. His decision was made. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling," Izzy said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the strained silence. Arthur barely glanced at her, his focus entirely on the retreating Dutchman. "Not now," he snapped his voice, a low, dismissive whip crack. To him, she was an interruption, a minor annoyance in a moment of catastrophic failure. Richard's frantic voice buzzed in his ear. "Arthur, what's going on? Who is that?" But Izzy didn't flinch. She ignored Arthur and addressed Hendrik van der Berg directly. In perfect formal Dutch, "Meneer van der Berg, mijn oprechte excuses for the onderbreking. Mr. van der Berg, my sincere apologies for the interruption." The effect was instantaneous and seismic. Van der Berg froze mid-movement. His head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with utter astonishment. To be addressed in his own language with such flawless pronunciation and formal deference by a waitress in a New York restaurant was so far outside the realm of possibility that for a moment he looked genuinely speechless. His two associates stared at her, their stoic masks cracking with disbelief. Arthur Sterling, hearing the foreign words flow so effortlessly from the woman he had just dismissed, turned his full attention to her. His mind struggled to process the scene. It was like watching a pigeon suddenly start quoting Shakespeare. Who was this woman? Izzy continued, her gaze steady on Van der Berg. "Ik hoorde uw gesprek en begreep uw frustratie over de vertraging. Als u het toestaat, zou ik wellicht van dienst kunnen zijn, totdat de heer Dubois arriveert. I overheard your conversation and understood your frustration with the delay. If you would permit it, perhaps I could be of service until Mr. Dubois arrives." She hadn't just spoken Dutch. She had used the formal you form. She had correctly identified his frustration, and she had offered a solution with humility and respect, a stark contrast to the perceived American arrogance he had been railing against just moments before. Van der Berg slowly, very slowly, sank back into his chair. He studied Izzy, his gaze sharp and analytical, as if trying to solve a complex equation. He responded, testing her. "U spreekt mijn taal opmerkelijk goed, juffrouw. Waar heeft u dat geleerd?" "You speak my language remarkably well, miss." "Where did you learn at Leiden University?" Sir Izzy replied in English, so Arthur could understand this part. "I was a student in the Linguistics and Philology department." She then switched back to Dutch to address Van der Berg directly. "Ik heb een bijzondere affiniteit voor de Germaanse talen. I have a particular affinity for the Germanic languages." Arthur's mind was racing. This was a lifeline. A bizarre, impossible lifeline thrown from the most unexpected quarter. Richard's voice was a babble of confused excitement in his ear. "Arthur, what is happening? Does she speak Dutch? Is she for real? Put her on the phone." "Quiet." Arthur subvocalized, his eyes never leaving Izzy. He looked at her properly for the first time. He saw past the uniform. He saw intelligence in her dark, focused eyes. He saw a composure under pressure that he hadn't seen in some of his own top executives. This wasn't just a fluke. The deal was bleeding out on the table. Standard procedure, corporate security, and common sense all screamed that this was a terrible idea. Trusting a random waitress with a multi-billion-dollar negotiation was the definition of insanity. But the alternative was guaranteed failure. The deal was already dead. What was the risk in a little necromancy? "What's your name?" Arthur asked her, his voice low and intense. "Isabella Rossi, sir." "Isabella," he said, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. "You understand what is at stake here. The technical vocabulary, the nuances of a corporate merger. I understand that Vandermeer Marine Tech is a world leader in hydrokinetic energy, capture specializing in oscillating water column and tidal stream generator technology, she replied calmly. And I understand that their latest patent regarding biomimetic turbine blades designed to reduce cavitation and acoustic impact on marine life is the key to Phase 2 of Project Tsunami. I also understand that Mr. van der Berg values tradition and legacy over disruptive growth. The room fell silent. Arthur stared at her, dumbfounded. Richard, listening through the earpiece, was audibly gasping. She hadn't just read a headline in the Wall Street Journal. She understood the core technology and the personalities involved. Van der Berg let out a short, sharp sound that might have been a laugh. He looked at Arthur with a newfound respect, as if this was all some elaborate, brilliant test Sterling had concocted. Uw personeel is beter geïnformeerd dan de meeste van uw concurrenten, meneer Sterling. Indrukwekkend. Your staff is better informed than most of your competitors, Mr. Sterling. Impressive. Arthur didn't need a translation for the tone. The ice had been broken. The momentum had shifted. He made a decision. It was a gamble of epic proportions, a move that would be legendary if it worked, and career-ending if it failed. He gestured to the empty chair beside him, the one reserved for the vanished Mr. Dubois. Miss Rossi. Arthur Sterling said, his voice resonating with the full weight of his authority. Please, join us. The sensation of sitting down at that table was for Isabella like stepping into another reality. The Belgian linen felt impossibly smooth beneath her fingertips. The weight of the sterling silver cutlery by her plate seemed immense. Moments ago, her job had been to ensure the water glasses were full. Now the fate of a $3.2 billion enterprise rested on her tongue. Arthur Sterling's team, listening in through his earpiece, was in a state of controlled panic. Richard Hayes was running a frantic background check on Isabella Rossi, expecting to find anything, a plant from a rival, a corporate spy, a fraud. All he was finding was a clean record, a mountain of student debt, an address in Queens, and a commendation for being Employee of the Month at the Ethelgard. It made no sense. Arthur, however, had moved past disbelief and into pure high-stakes pragmatism. He looked at Izzy, his gaze intense. We're going to establish a system. When he speaks, you listen. Don't translate word for word unless I ask. Give me the gist, the intent. More importantly, give me the subtext. What is he not saying? When I speak, translate faithfully, but use the appropriate level of formality. Understand? Perfectly, Mr. Sterling. Izzy replied, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Van der Berg watched this exchange with keen interest. He then leaned forward, folding his hands on the table, and began. He spoke in Dutch, his tone, now that of a serious negotiator. Goed, laten we de formaliteiten overslaan. Ik ben hier niet gekomen voor de Amerikaanse gastvrijheid. Mijn team heeft uw voorstel tot in detail geanalyseerd, met name de clausules betreffende de integratie van ons personeel en het behoud van de Van der Meer-naam als een autonome onderzoeksdivisie. Izzy listened intently, her expression unreadable. She let him finish, then turned to Arthur. He wants to skip the pleasantries, she began, her voice low and concise. He says his team has analyzed the proposal, and his primary concern is what happens to his people, the integration clauses, and the preservation of the Van der Meer name as a distinct research division. Arthur nodded. This was expected. Tell him, he began, that his people are his greatest asset. We aren't acquiring a company, we are partnering with a legacy. The Van der Meer name will not just be preserved, It will be amplified on a global stage, heading all of Sterling Dynamics' marine energy projects. Izzy turned back to Van der Berg and translated Arthur's corporate speak into something more resonant for the old Dutchman. She chose her words carefully, using phrases that evoked tradition and honor, rather than synergy and growth. De heer Sterling erkent dat uw mensen uw grootste kapitaal zijn. Hij beschouwt dit niet als een overname, maar als een partnerschap met een erfenis. De naam Van der Meer zal niet alleen behouden blijven, maar zal met het grootste respect worden verheven tot het hoofd van al onze maritieme energieprojecten, een baken van uw nalatenschap. Mr. Sterling recognizes that your people are your greatest capital. He does not see this as an acquisition, but as a partnership with a legacy. The Van der Meer name will not only be preserved, but will be elevated with the utmost respect to lead all of our maritime energy projects, a beacon of your legacy. She had added the phrase, a beacon of your legacy, herself. It was a small embellishment, but it was aimed squarely at the Dutchman's pride. A flicker of approval showed in Van der Berg's eyes. He saw that she hadn't just translated the words. She had translated the intent into a language he understood culturally. The negotiation deepened. They moved on to financial specifics, patent licensing terms, and timelines for technology transfer. For the next hour, Izzy was a conduit, a bridge between two worlds. She moved effortlessly between the aggressive, fast-paced jargon of American tech and the more deliberate, formal language of old-world European engineering. At one point, Van der Berg's associate, a stern man named Peter, raised a technical objection. He spoke in a rapid-fire technical Dutch filled with engineering terms that would have stumped a lesser linguist. De voorgestelde integratietijdlijn voor onze Vortex-stal-regeltechnologie is onrealistisch. Het negeert de noodzakelijke calibratieprotocollen die 6 maanden in situ testen vereisen. Uw projectie zou de structurele integriteit van de turbinebladen in gevaar kunnen brengen. Arthur leaned toward Izzy. What was that? He looked agitated. It's a technical point, she whispered. He's saying your timeline for integrating their vortex stall control technology is too aggressive. He says it needs a 6-month calibration period of on-site testing, and your projection risks the structural integrity of the turbine blades. She paused, then added her own insight. Sir, he's not just stating a fact. He's testing our technical competence. He believes we see his tech as a simple plug-and-play component. This was the key. Izzy wasn't just a dictionary. She was an interpreter of meaning. Arthur's respect for her grew exponentially. He had been about to argue about the timeline to push back with financial projections. Her insight changed his entire approach. Tell him this, Arthur said, his voice firm. Tell him he is absolutely correct. Izzy's eyes widened slightly. Tell him we not only agree, but that we propose his lead engineer, Dr. Janssen, oversee the entire integration process with an unlimited budget and on his own timeline. His team knows the technology best. We defer to their expertise completely. It was a brilliant move, a concession that was actually a masterstroke of diplomacy. It showed respect, acknowledged their superior expertise, and removed a major point of friction. Izzy translated the counteroffer. As she spoke, the tension visibly drained from Peter's shoulders. Van der Berg looked at Arthur, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. He nodded slowly. Dat is een verstandig antwoord. Zeer verstandig. That is a wise answer. Very wise. The deal was back from the dead. It was breathing. Arthur Sterling, who had started the meeting powerless, was now in full command, not through dominance, but through a new kind of weapon, the nuanced understanding provided by an anonymous waitress. As they paused for a fresh pot of coffee, Richard's voice came through the earpiece again, this time a hushed, awestruck whisper. "Arthur, we found something on the Translator Dubois. His car was found abandoned near the Queensboro Bridge. No sign of a struggle, but his briefcase and phone are gone. The police have been notified. But here's the kicker. His financials show a recent anonymous deposit of $239,000 from an offshore account, an account we've previously traced back to a shell corporation owned by Damon Pierce." Arthur's blood ran cold. This wasn't a traffic jam. This wasn't a random disappearance. This was sabotage. His chief rival, the head of Titan Corp., had tried to scuttle the biggest deal of his life by surgically removing the one person he thought was essential. He looked across the table at the calm, composed young woman who was now discussing the merits of Sumatran coffee with Hendrik van der Berg, as if they were old friends. Damon Pierce had taken his translator, but in a stroke of cosmic irony, he had overlooked the waitress in the corner. The most important person in the room had been hiding in plain sight. And she wasn't just translating, she was transforming the entire negotiation. The coffee break was a brief ceasefire in a war of words and wills. As a fresh pot was delivered by a different, slightly bewildered-looking waiter, Arthur took the moment to study Isabella Rossi. She was no longer just a surprising anomaly. She was a strategic asset of incalculable value. The revelation about Dubois and Damon Pierce had recast the entire morning. This wasn't just a business meeting, it was a battlefield, and he had stumbled upon a secret weapon. "Isabella," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I need to know more about you. Your knowledge isn't just academic. That comment about the biomimetic blades, where did that come from?" Izzy looked down at her hands for the first time, showing a flicker of vulnerability. "My father," she said softly. "He was a structural engineer. Marco Rossi. He specialized in fluid dynamics. He loved his work. He used to talk about it all the time, about making things stronger, more efficient, more in harmony with nature. He had a great respect for Dutch engineering, for their centuries-long battle with the sea. He called them the masters of water." There was a profound sadness in her voice, a story untold. But before Arthur could press further, van der Berg cleared his throat, signaling the truce was over. It was time to address the final, most difficult obstacle. The Dutchman leaned forward, his expression grave. "Meneer Sterling, we komen nu bij het meest delicate punt. Het gaat niet om geld of patenten. Het gaat om de ziel van mijn bedrijf. De nalatenschap-clausule." Izzy translated her own tone, becoming more serious. "Mr. Sterling, we've come to the most delicate point. He says it isn't about money or patents. It's about the soul of his company, the legacy clause." Arthur stiffened. He knew this was coming. The legacy clause was a non-standard, deeply personal set of demands that his legal team had flagged as emotionally driven and financially problematic. It stipulated that for a period of 25 years, there could be no layoffs at the Van der Meer facility in Rotterdam, that the company must continue to fund a local trade school for marine engineers, and that a percentage of profits be reinvested into North Sea coastal preservation projects. To Arthur, a man accustomed to optimizing streamlining and cutting redundancies, this was an anchor chained to the hull of his sleek, efficient vessel. "This clause is difficult," Arthur started carefully. "Guaranteeing no layoffs for 25 years is untenable in a fluctuating market. We can offer generous severance packages, a retraining fund." Izzy began to translate, but as she did, she could see the light in van der Berg's eyes hardening. She saw his posture stiffen. She held up a hand, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture to stop Arthur. It was an act of incredible audacity, a waitress telling a billionaire CEO to be quiet. But Arthur, against all his instincts, fell silent. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered urgently, "you're approaching this like a line item on a balance sheet. For him, this isn't business. This is his family's name. His grandfather founded that facility. The people who work there are the children and grandchildren of the men his grandfather hired. The trade school is named after his late wife. You're not negotiating terms. You're trying to put a price on his life's work." She took a deep breath. "My father, he worked for a big American firm once. They were bought out. The new owners came in with speeches about synergy and optimization. A month later, they fired everyone over 45. My father was 50. He never found meaningful work as an engineer again. It broke his spirit. That's what Mr. Vanderberg is afraid of. He's afraid of you." The story, delivered in a quiet, pained whisper, hit Arthur with the force of a physical blow. He saw not a Dutch industrialist across the table, but a reflection of Izzy's father and a version of himself he didn't want to become. He had been so focused on the what of the deal that he had completely ignored the why. His perspective shifted. He looked at Vanderberg, truly looked at him, and for the first time he understood. The old man wasn't being difficult, he was being protective. He was a shepherd guarding his flock. Arthur's voice, when he spoke again, was different. The hard corporate edge was gone, replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. "Isabella," he said. "Ask him to tell me about his wife." The question was so unexpected, it hung in the air for a moment. Izzy looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw the change, the sincerity. She turned to Vanderberg. "Meneer Vanderberg, de heer Sterling, vraagt of u hem over uw vrouw zou willen vertellen." The old Dutchman was taken aback, a blinked suspicion warring with surprise on his face. He began to speak slowly, hesitantly at first, then with a growing warmth. He spoke of his wife Annelies, of her passion for education, and how she believed that the company had a sacred duty to nurture the next generation of Dutch engineers. The trade school wasn't a charity project. It was the embodiment of her spirit. Izzy translated his words, her voice imbued with the emotion of the story. The atmosphere in the alcove transformed. It was no longer a battlefield, but a space of shared human experience. When Vanderberg finished, a heavy silence settled over the table. Arthur leaned forward. "Isabella, tell him this. Exactly as I say it." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "Hendrik." He began using the man's first name for the first time. "The Annelies Vanderberg Technical Academy will not just be funded. Sterling Dynamics will double its endowment, effective immediately. We will create international scholarships in her name to bring the brightest young minds to Rotterdam to learn from your people. Regarding your employees," he continued, "a 25-year guarantee is impractical, but a promise is not. I will give you my personal guarantee, not a corporate one, but my word as a man that no employee from your Rotterdam facility will be made redundant. We will find a role for every single one of them. We will retrain them, we will repurpose their skills, but we will not discard them. Your people will become our people. As for the coastal preservation, my mother grew up in a small fishing town in Maine. It's gone now, lost to economic decline and coastal erosion. I understand the desire to protect the sea that gives you life. We will honor that commitment fully." Izzy translated every word, her voice resonating with the weight of his sincerity. She felt a lump form in her throat. This was the turning point. This was the moment that would make or break the entire future of both companies. When she finished, Hendrik Vanderberg stared at Arthur Sterling for a long, unbroken minute, The silence stretched on taut and fragile. The two associates held their breath. Finally, the old Dutchman slowly extended his hand across the table. "Meneer Sterling," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "U bent geen zakenman. U bent een bouwer. Net als ik." Izzy didn't need to translate. The meaning was clear in his eyes, in the firm grip of his handshake. "Mr. Sterling, you are not a businessman. You are a builder, just like me." The deal was done. As the two titans of industry stood, a sense of elation and relief washed over the alcove. The associates were smiling. Arthur felt a surge of triumph unlike any he had ever known. He hadn't just won a negotiation, he had forged a true partnership. And he had done it because of the waitress who had reminded him of the human element in the cold calculus of business. It was in that moment of victory that Vanderberg, still holding Arthur's hand, turned his warm gaze to Izzy. "Thank you, my dear," he said in English. "You have a wisdom beyond your years. May I ask your full name again?" "Isabella Rossi, sir." The name dropped into the quiet atmosphere. Vanderberg's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of intense concentration, of a distant memory being pulled into focus. "Rossi," he mused, tasting the name. "Marco Rossi, the engineer. He was not by any chance your father." Izzy's heart stopped. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How did you know him?" Vanderberg's eyes widened, a look of profound, dawning recognition on his face. He let go of Arthur's hand and took a step closer to her. "Know him," he said, his voice filled with awe. "My dear girl, Marco Rossi was a legend. He solved the resonance cascade problem on the Oosterscheldekering storm surge barrier, a problem that had stumped Dutch engineers for a decade. We called him De Vindingrijke Italiaan, the ingenious Italian. I tried to hire him 20 years ago, but he was loyal to his American firm." He shook his head in wonder. "I never knew what became of him. To think, his daughter." Arthur Sterling stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. The world, which had already turned upside-axe down once that day, had just done so again. The waitress who saved his deal wasn't just a bright, lucky linguist. She was the daughter of an engineering genius whose name the other party revered as legend. The revelation hung in the air heavier and more significant than the $3.2 billion figure they had just agreed upon. The narrative of the day had been irrevocably altered. This was no longer a story of a waitress who happened to know Dutch. It was the story of a legacy unexpectedly coming full circle. Isabella was stunned into silence. She had always known her father was brilliant, but in her world, he was a tragic figure, a genius discarded by a callous corporate system who spent his final years tinkering with small engines in his garage and poring over old textbooks, his vast intellect confined to the four walls of their small Queen's apartment. To hear his name spoken with such reverence by a man like Hendrik van der Berg was like seeing a faded black and white photograph suddenly burst into vibrant color. He passed away 2 years ago," Izzy said, her voice trembling slightly. "The company he worked for, Atlantic Dynamics, was acquired by Titan Corp. They restructured." The name Titan Corp landed like a grenade in the quiet alcove. Arthur's head snapped up. Damon Pierce, the man who had tried to sabotage this very meeting. The pieces of a much larger, darker puzzle were beginning to click into place. Vanderberg's expression darkened with a mix of sorrow and anger. "Titan Corp," he said, the name tasting like poison. Damon Pierce, a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. So that is what became of Marco, a tragedy, an absolute waste of a brilliant mind. He looked at Izzy, his eyes filled with a new paternal warmth. Your father solved a problem for my country that saved us billions of guilders and protected countless lives. He refused any payment, saying it was an intellectual exercise. That is the kind of man he was." He shook his head slowly. "And here you are, his daughter, saving this deal not just with your language, but with his wisdom. It seems the Rossi integrity is genetic." Arthur felt a complex mix of emotions, astonishment, relief, and a growing sense of shame. He had seen Izzy as a tool, a miraculous solution to his problem. He hadn't seen the person, the history, the legacy she carried. He had almost dismissed her, just as Titan Corp had dismissed her father. The irony was galling. The formal atmosphere of the negotiation was completely gone, replaced by something far more personal. Vanderberg insisted that Izzy sit with them, not as a translator, but as a guest of honor. They ordered a celebratory lunch, and the conversation shifted from business to history. Vanderberg shared stories of working with her father, painting a picture of the vibrant, passionate engineer Izzy had only known in his later subdued years. For Izzy, it was a profound, healing experience. She was reclaiming a part of her father that had been stolen from him. Through the eyes of this powerful man, she was seeing the giant her father truly was. As they ate, Arthur found himself watching her. He saw the way she lit up when discussing her father's work, the deep intelligence that had been hiding behind a waitress's weary facade. He realized she hadn't just translated words. She had channeled an entire philosophy of engineering, one based on integrity, legacy, and human value. It was the philosophy of Marco Rossi, and it had resonated perfectly with Hendrik Vanderberg. Richard's voice, now calm and collected, came through the earpiece. "Arthur, the police have confirmed Dubois is safe. He's shaken but unharmed. He's at the 17th precinct. He's talking. He said 2 men cornered him in his parking garage this morning. They didn't threaten him physically. They showed him photos of his daughter at her university in Paris. They told him to take a drive and lose his phone. He admits he was paid, but he claims he was terrified. The money was just to ensure his silence." The confirmation was chilling. Damon Pierce hadn't just played a corporate prank. He had engaged in criminal intimidation. He had targeted a man's family to get what he wanted. The contrast between Pierce's methods and the scene unfolding at the table was stark. Pierce had tried to win by breaking connections, by creating a void of communication. Arthur had just triumphed by forging a connection, by finding a bridge in the most unlikely person imaginable. When the lunch concluded, handshakes were exchanged all around. Vanderberg's associates, who had been stoic and intimidating just hours before, now smiled warmly at Izzy, congratulating her as much as they did Arthur. As the Dutch delegation prepared to leave, Hendrik Vanderberg took Izzy's hands in his. "Isabella," he said, his voice earnest. "Your place is not here polishing glasses. You have your father's mind and a diplomat's grace. When Mr. Sterling formally establishes the new Vandermeer division, I would be honored if you would accept a position as the primary liaison between our Rotterdam office and his headquarters in New York. You are the perfect bridge between our 2 worlds." It was an incredible offer, a life-changing opportunity presented on a silver platter. Izzy was overwhelmed, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Thank you." "Say yes," Arthur said, stepping forward. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "He's right. This is where you belong." He then looked at Vanderberg. "And I'll be raising the offer he was about to make you. You'll also be heading a new initiative at Sterling Dynamics, the Marco Rossi program for ethical engineering. You'll have a full scholarship to complete your doctorate, and you'll help us ensure we never forget the principles your father embodied." The world tilted on its axis for Isabella Rossi. In the span of a few hours, she had gone from worrying about next month's rent to being offered a senior executive role at a global corporation with a funded doctorate and a program named after her father. After the Dutch team departed in a black town car, Arthur and Izzy were left alone in the quiet alcove. The remnants of their celebratory lunch sat on the table, a testament to the impossible events of the day. "I can't possibly accept," Izzy finally said, breaking the silence. "It's too much. I'm a waitress." "You were a waitress," Arthur corrected her gently. "As of this morning, you became the most valuable player in a multi-billion-dollar deal. You didn't just translate, Isabella. You strategized. You empathized. You saw the heart of the problem when all I could see were the numbers. That's a skill that can't be taught. It's more valuable than any MBA from Harvard." He paused, his expression turning grim. "And besides," he added, "I have a feeling our work is just beginning. The man who tried to sabotage this deal, Damon Pierce, he's the same man whose company acquired your father's and threw him away. This is no longer just business. It's personal, and I'm going to need allies I can trust." He looked at her, his eyes holding a new respect, a new partnership. "What do you say, Ms. Rossi? Are you ready to help me finish what he started?" Izzy thought of her father, of his wasted potential, of the quiet dignity with which he bore his professional humiliation. She thought of the injustice of it all, and for the first time, in a long time, she felt not the weight of her circumstances, but the fire of her own potential. A fire her father had lit, and which Arthur Sterling was now fanning into a flame. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am." The week following the Ethelgard meeting was a whirlwind of change for Isabella Rossi. She traded her waitress's apron for tailored corporate attire, her cramped Queen's apartment for a sleek suite overlooking Central Park. The transition was dizzying, but beneath the surface of her new life, a quiet resolve had hardened into steel. This was about more than a new job. It was about justice for her father. For Arthur Sterling, the successful deal was only the beginning. He was preparing for war. Damon Pierce's attempt at sabotage was not merely a business obstacle. It was a personal violation that revealed a deeper sickness. He assembled a small, trusted team in a secure conference room high in the Sterling Tower. His COO, Richard Hayes, their sharp-witted general counsel, Cassandra Shaw, and Isabella Rossi. Damon's move was arrogant and sloppy. Arthur began pacing before the panoramic window. "We have the translator's sworn statement about the intimidation. But it's not enough. Pierce will bury us in litigation, claiming we coerced a disgruntled employee. It becomes a messy battle of attrition. We can't just react to what he did to us. We need to expose him for what he is." Cassandra Shaw, pragmatic and precise, tapped her stylus on a tablet. "To do that, we need to establish a pattern of behavior. Legally, his previous acquisitions are clean. He fires people, but that isn't a crime. We need a smoking gun, something that shows intent beyond simple, albeit brutal, corporate restructuring." The room was silent as they considered the challenge. It was Izzy who broke the silence, her voice quiet but firm. "My father kept records," she said. After Titan Corp acquired his company, Atlantic Dynamics, he stayed in touch with his old team. He called them the Old Guard. He was devastated by what happened to them, how their careers were destroyed. He kept a ledger. Hope flickered in the room. For 2 days, Izzy returned to her father's apartment and delved into his meticulously organized files. In a box labeled AD Correspondence, she found it. It was not just a list of names, it was a chronicle of devastation. It detailed the systematic removal of every engineer over the age of 50, their years of service, their lost pensions, and their subsequent struggles. Marco Rossi had documented the human cost of Damon Pierce's ambition. It was a memorial of loyalty, and now it was a weapon. Armed with this ledger, Cassandra's legal team began to discreetly contact the forgotten engineers. They listened to stories of financial ruin and professional humiliation. Then they got their breakthrough. A retired software engineer named Samuel Vance, his voice trembling with a decade of suppressed rage, provided the missing piece. Pierce didn't just fire us, Vance explained via a secure video call. He engineered the entire situation. Months before the acquisition, we had a catastrophic software failure on a major project. It caused huge delays and cost the company millions, making us a prime target for a buyout. Marco Rossi, brilliant as he was, eventually fixed it. But I always suspected the initial bug was no accident. It was too clever, too precise. It was sabotage. A chill went through the war room. They cross-referenced the project's timeline with Atlantic Dynamics visitor logs. There it was, in black and white. Damon Pierce had conducted a preliminary assessment visit 2 days before the bug mysteriously appeared. He had been escorted by the head of IT, a man who was conveniently promoted to a lucrative position at a Titan subsidiary weeks after the takeover. "My God," Richard whispered. "He's not a vulture picking at carcasses. He's a hunter who wounds his prey to weaken it for the kill. He did it to Atlantic Dynamics, and he tried to do it to us by taking out Dubois. Now they had their pattern, their smoking gun." The strategy shifted. A direct legal assault was still risky. Instead, they would fight Pierce in the court of public opinion. The plan was a two-pronged attack. First, Arthur would use the Vandermeer partnership announcement to draw a moral line in the sand. Second, they would give the entire story from Dubois' intimidation to the sabotage of Atlantic Dynamics to a trusted investigative journalist. The press conference was a major media event. Arthur, with Hendrik van der Berg on a large screen beside him, announced the successful deal. Then he went off script. "This partnership is founded on a shared principle," Arthur declared, his voice resonating with conviction. "That a company's greatest asset is its people. That legacy and integrity are the true foundations of progress." He then told the story of a brilliant, loyal engineer, Marco Rossi, who had been callously discarded by a competitor's slash-and-burn tactics. He didn't say the name Titan Corp. He didn't have to. He then stunned the audience by introducing the Marco Rossi program for ethical engineering and its new head, Isabella Rossi. Izzy stepped to the podium, poised and powerful, and spoke of her father's belief in honoring human capital. The message was unmistakable. It was a public rebuke of Damon Pierce's entire philosophy. The conference created a shockwave in the financial world, but it was only the opening salvo. 2 days later, an article by Pulitzer Prize winner Sylvia Robertson dropped on the front page of the New York Times. The headline was an earthquake. "Titans of industry or corporate predators. Whistleblowers accuse Titan Corp of systematic sabotage and intimidation." The article laid out the entire sordid story, weaving together the intimidation of the Translator, the tragic fate of Marco Rossi's team, and Samuel Vance's explosive accusation of corporate sabotage. Marco Rossi's ledger was no longer a private document of grief. It was public evidence of a crime. The story was a firestorm. By the time the markets closed, Titan Corp's stock was in a nosedive. The board was in an emergency session. Damon Pierce, the untouchable Titan who operated in the shadows, was trapped in a blinding spotlight of his own making. The unraveling had begun. The fallout from the New York Times article was swift and brutal. Damon Pierce's carefully constructed empire built on fear and intimidation, began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. The story of Marco Rossi and the old guard of Atlantic Dynamics became a symbol of corporate greed, resonating with a public tired of hearing about heartless layoffs and vulture capitalism. Other victims of Titan Corp's acquisitions previously silenced by NDAs saw an opportunity. Emboldened by the article, and with legal backing from a pro bono fund quietly established by the Sterling Foundation, they began to speak out. A class action lawsuit was filed by former employees, alleging age discrimination and fraudulent acquisition practices. The SEC launched a formal investigation into Titan Corp's activities, specifically the convenient, technical failures that preceded their lowball offers. Damon Pierce, who had always operated from the shadows, was dragged into the light. He issued furious denials, blaming the entire affair on a smear campaign by his rival Arthur Sterling. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his reputation was in tatters. His board, facing shareholder revolt and a plunging stock price, had no choice. Within a month, Damon Pierce was forced to resign in disgrace from the company he had built. Titan Corp was forced into a massive restructuring, selling off divisions to cover the legal costs and settlements. The predator had become the prey. In the gleaming offices of Sterling Dynamics, there was no gloating. There was a sense of somber victory. They hadn't just won a business battle, they had championed a cause. Arthur Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in his office, looking out at the city. The Vandermeer deal was now proceeding smoothly, faster than anyone had anticipated. The collaboration between the Sterling and Vandermeer engineers was proving to be incredibly fruitful. The door opened, and Isabella Rossi walked in. In a few short weeks, she had transformed. The quiet, observant waitress was gone, replaced by a confident, articulate executive. She had thrown herself into her new roles with the same intensity and intelligence she had applied to the negotiation. The Marco Rossi program was already taking shape, with partnerships being formed with MIT and Caltech. She was a natural leader. The first round of scholarship applications for the program just went live. She said, a proud smile on her face. We received over 500 in the first hour. That's because of you, Izzy, Arthur said, turning from the window. He had long since dropped the formal Isabella. You gave it a soul. You gave it your father's soul. You gave me the chance, she countered. You listened to me when I was just a waitress. I almost didn't. He admitted a rare moment of humility from the titan of industry. I almost let my arrogance sink the most important deal of my life. You reminded me of something I had forgotten in my rush to the top, that true strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about having the wisdom to listen to the quietest one. Their relationship had evolved from a strange, crisis-born alliance into one of deep mutual respect and genuine friendship. Izzy had become one of his most trusted advisors, her insight and emotional intelligence a perfect counterbalance to his aggressive, analytical mind. Hendrik van der Berg sends his regards, Izzy said, changing the subject. He wants to know when we'll be visiting Rotterdam. He said he has a few of my father's old colleagues who would be honored to meet me. Arthur smiled. Book the jet. We'll go next week. It's time to see the foundation of our new future being built. As Izzy left his office, Arthur reflected on the improbable series of events. It all seemed so impossible, yet so strangely inevitable. He had gone into that meeting at the Ethelgard expecting a battle of finances and logistics. Instead, he had been given a lesson in humanity. He had been so focused on acquiring technology that he had almost missed the opportunity to inherit a legacy. His greatest rival had been defeated, his company was stronger than ever, and his future was brighter than he could have imagined. And it was all because of a series of fortunate accidents, a saboteur's plot, a vanished translator, and the courage of a young woman polishing wine glasses in the corner a woman who carried the spirit of an engineering legend within her, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. The world of business would go on with its profits and losses, its mergers and acquisitions, but for Arthur Sterling, the foundation had changed forever. He was no longer just building a company. He was building a legacy his new friend and her father would have been proud of. And so, a deal teetering on the brink of disaster was saved not by a team of high-powered lawyers or financial wizards, but by the quiet courage of one woman who dared to speak up. Isabella Rossi's story is a powerful reminder that value isn't always found on a resume or in a title. Sometimes, the most extraordinary talents are hidden in the most ordinary of places, waiting for a single moment to change everything. It shows us that integrity and empathy are not weaknesses in the world of high-stakes business, but are in fact the most powerful assets of all. Arthur Sterling learned that day that by listening to the quietest voice, he found the key to his greatest success and a moral compass for his future. If this story of unexpected heroism and poetic justice moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that one person can truly make a difference. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more incredible true life stories that will inspire and amaze you. Thank you for listening.